Welcome to the Fund the People podcast. I'm your host, Rusty Stahl. I'm president and CEO of Fund the People, where our mission is to maximize investment in America's nonprofit workforce. We give funders and nonprofits cutting-edge ideas, research, and tools to help drive equity, effectiveness, and endurance in the social sector. So let's start the show. Thank you for being a loyal listener to the Fund the People podcast. Since you're here, there's a chance you're deriving some value from the show. For that reason, I'm thrilled to invite you to join the new premium version of the Fund the People podcast on Patreon. For just $6 a month, you'll provide unrestricted support to Fund the People, which will be very appreciated. And you'll also get great value from the show. You'll get extended versions of each episode of our show that you can enjoy in audio or video form. You'll get exclusive videos and bonus content. You'll get opportunities to participate in and contribute to live episodes and discussions with me and your fellow Patreon members. And you'll get Riverside Reflections. This is our special new Patreon-only podcast that invites you to take a walk with me and have an unscripted conversation in the beautiful Hudson Valley in New York. You'll get an inside view of Fund the People's work while we get outside for a walk together. Each episode comes with a post-episode video and other special surprises. In these videos, I show you around the incredible landscape. I skip some stones, and we sit together silently with the river waves for a moment of meditation. We created Riverside Reflections for our most loyal listeners, so it's available exclusively to our Patreon members. Our Patreon is just $6 a month, the price of a fancy cup of coffee. It's a great value for a great price. And you're not only supporting a podcast, Fund the People is a national nonprofit. We've been primarily supported by foundation grants, but we're steadily growing our base of earned revenue and individual supporters. Your monthly subscription through Patreon helps build Fund the People's diversified base of support so that we can continue to be an independent and powerful force advocating for you and the entire nonprofit workforce. In fact, as a Patreon member, you won't just be supporting this organization, you'll be part of the grassroots movement that is growing the visibility, voice, and power of the nonprofit workforce to ensure better wages, well-being, and working conditions. So I look forward to connecting with you in our Patreon community. And now, back to the show. Welcome to the Fund the People podcast. In this episode, you'll learn about a fascinating funding experiment. Rework the Bay, a unique funder intermediary housed within the San Francisco Foundation, supported 8 nonprofits to engage frontline employees in participatory research to improve job quality and working conditions in their organizations. The premise of this experiment, prioritizing job quality for client-facing staff, is essential not only for worker well-being, but also for organizational sustainability, ensuring that nonprofits can retain talent, deliver higher quality services, and drive lasting change for the communities they serve. So what happened? Did the premise turn out to be correct? Stay tuned to find out. For those of you concerned with reforming philanthropic funding practices, our guests also share powerful story about how Rework the Bay has evolved over 20 years so that today, rather than a simple funder learning space or a re-granting initiative, Rework the Bay engages leaders from the field to guide grant making in an approach they refer to as proximate philanthropy. And for those of you interested in workforce development as a nonprofit field in and of itself, our guests have something to say about the future of workforce development. So we'll get into all of that in this episode, which is, I'm proud to say, another installment of our California Voices series here on this Fund the People podcast. And this series amplifies the voices of some of the presenters, partners, and participants from our California Talent Justice Summit, which took place in December 2024. Check out the show notes for a link to our Spotify playlist of all the episodes in the California Voices series. Okay, now let me introduce you to our fantastic guests today, Brianna Rogers and Rob Hope, both of Rework the Bay. Rework the Bay's initiative officer, Brianna Rogers, partners on Rework's fundraising efforts and leads their systems change projects focused on building worker power, workforce training, and advancing job quality. Brianna grew up in Berkeley, but got her start in philanthropy as a National Urban Fellow at the Andrews Family Fund in New York City. In 2020, she joined the San Francisco Foundation's Partnership for Hope SF team, where she worked until joining the Rework team in 2022. Brianna, I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Rusty.
All right. And we've also got Rob Hope. Rob is the director of Rework the Bay, where he's responsible for leading execution of Rework the Bay's strategy, as well as fundraising, grant making, budget management, and partnership building. Rob joined Rework the Bay in October of 2017 after serving as chief program officer at Rubicon Programs. And his prior professional experiences include working in the workforce development field, program evaluation, and policy analysis, as well as community building work. Thanks for being here, Rob.
Thanks, Rusty. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, thank you both for making time to do this. And thanks to Rework the Bay for serving as a co-convener and one of the presenters at the California Talent Justice Summit. I'm excited to be back in touch with you and to have this opportunity to learn more about your work and share it with our national audience, just like we did with the California audience at the summit. So, Brianna, Rework the Bay, one of your partners is Jobs for the Future, an organization which maybe you can, as we go, tell us a little bit about the partners involved in this job quality initiative, because I think they're important. We can give them shout outs. So, Rework the Bay, in partnership with Jobs for the Future, published this report in June of 2025, which we're going to discuss at some length in this episode. And on the cover of the report, it has this quote that really struck me. It says, "A paradox of the workforce development industry is that the organizations dedicated to promoting quality job pathways for job seekers often struggle to provide their own employees with quality jobs." So why do you think this paradox exists, and why does it matter?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Rusty. I think primarily, right, and especially after this multi-year project where we explored, right, why this exists in real time. And what we found out is that many organizations lack resources, right? So they have to prioritize resource allocation to operate under tight budgets and funding constraints. It's really huge. We found that led to a lot of prioritizing programmatic outcomes over employee compensation and benefits, or even employee resources that lead to well-being and professional development. And so, yeah, organizations based on budget were focused merely on delivering services to clients rather than investing in their workforce. Market pressures, a lot of organizations face pressure to deliver immediate results, right? When you think about nonprofits are fueled by philanthropic dollars, right? Foundations or state funding or federal funding. Now, oftentimes it can put a nonprofit in a starvation cycle. And so when you have that pressure and you're thinking about your outcomes, oftentimes you focus on more short-term outcomes rather than long-term outcomes, which, can create this lack of, formal systems within an organization that can help an employee develop themselves or lead to different type of career pathways. Just as they aim to provide pathways for job seekers, workforce development organizations should prioritize, right, professional development and a kind of a clear journey and career progression for their staff and their own employees. But unfortunately, they don't. Mm-hmm. Why does this matter? I think quality of services. And I will say this, a strategy to hire someone who has personal lived experience that can speak to the personal lived experience to the clients that they serve, it's a great strategy, right? So if you have a workforce development organization and you are tasked with helping someone to find a job who is formerly incarcerated, who is maybe an immigrant to the country, who has different issues with being system impacted, maybe they're in a houseless situation, you can identify with that person because only you know up close and personal what that client is experiencing firsthand. So it's a great hiring strategy. I don't knock that a bit. However, the issue lies in that becomes exhausting. It becomes exhausting for the staff member, for the employees. And they're oftentimes caught in this survival cycle where they're just kind of barely maintaining to survive because it is exhausting. Mm-hmm. There's high turnover rates because of a lack of good job quality. I think that poor job quality can harm an organization's reputation. That matters too. I think that addressing this paradox is pretty essential for the future of workforce because it's important to invest in employees. It's important for organizations to model quality job pathways within the organization as well. And I think overall resolving this paradox can lead to better service delivery within organizations for the clients as well, employee satisfaction, right? Employee retention, employee wellness. At the end of the day, Rusty, workers like to feel seen, valued, and heard, right? And they want to, feel like their work is not necessarily transactional, right? They want to feel like their employer has a plan for them or at least has space for them to develop themselves as well. And so that's why this is really important. It's important for sustainability purposes as well.
Well, Rob, to tackle this lack of workforce development in the workforce development organizations, you all launched this job quality project in May 2023. And I would love it if you could give listeners a high-level synopsis of what the Job Quality Project did, I guess between May of 23 and June of 25, or whatever the timeline has been. Give us a picture of what this whole thing is, and then we can dive into more of what you all did and learned.
So it all kind of started through our relationship with the Irvine Foundation, James Irvine Foundation. They were interested in supporting an effort to improve the quality of jobs at workforce development organizations. And really, because of what they had heard from their grantees through the pandemic, seeing how burnt out everyone was feeling, they were hearing horror stories about situations happening at EDD offices, which is where people go to get their aid in California. And they were interested in whether there might be a way to kind of leverage the approach of Rework the Bay, which is really about centering the wisdom of people who are closest to the issues we're trying to solve. If we could apply that model to this question of workforce development job quality. It is very meta. And so hopefully we will be able to keep things straight here as we talk it through. But what we ended up doing is putting out an RFP to select partners. And we structured the RFP a little prescriptively because we wanted to make sure that the approach aligned with our values around inclusion and participation. Ultimately, through the RFP process, we chose to partner with Jobs for the Future and then a second organization called the PATH Group, who is an organization we actually had partnered with in the past on some job quality related participatory research. And so we were really excited about that team of the sort of national policy expertise of JFF together with the real community grounded participatory research expertise of the PATH Group. We partnered with them really closely to talk through what this model could look like, how we would select organizations to participate in the cohort, what the worker researcher roles would look like, how we communicate that to the organizations. And then we put out a second RFP, and this was to select cohort organizations. And at the request of the Irvine Foundation, we selected organizations in 3 counties across the state. They really wanted to see how this approach might differ in terms of its applicability in different communities with different workers in different sectors. And so we ended up selecting 8 organizations across LA County, Fresno County, and Sonoma County. And they ranged from large statewide organizations providing workforce development to transition age youth to very small organizations serving farm workers in Fresno County. We also worked with organizations who specifically served formerly incarcerated people, as that's sort of the third primary focus area for Rework the Bay. So ultimately, we selected these 8 organizations, we made grants to them, and we engaged their leadership in a conversation around what our goals were for the project. We really wanted to make sure that they understood that we were not trying to call anybody out. We weren't trying to point to some deficiency in their organization. We wanted to really partner with them authentically to build the leadership of their staff while also providing them more accurate input from their employees about what they would see as benefits to their own personal job quality. And in some ways, I think it took a little time for that trust to be built. But ultimately, with their partnership, incredible things were accomplished through this project, which I know we're going to talk more about. But that's sort of how we got to the place of having a cohort, having a project team, and then we were kind of off and running with the research.
So I'm just trying to flesh out the picture of what happened after the whole thing got into motion so that then the findings will make sense as we talk about them. So the research itself, was it mostly interviewing their colleagues, their peers within their organizations, and then coding those transcripts?
Yep.
Okay.
So they worked with members from JFF, Path Group, and ourselves as well. We were kind of cooks outside the kitchen a bit, being aware of power dynamics as a funder, right? But we really empowered these two organizations and invested for them to guide that process. And so once they came out for the training and they were trained as participatory researchers, they went back to their organizations and they started the process of doing interviews with their colleagues, their coworkers. Pretty much everybody in the organization was interviewed on every level, including senior management, including HR and senior leadership as well. And it wasn't easy. I will say that, right? I mean, there were a sets of questions that they kind of had to revise. They asked different questions to lower tenured staff than they did maybe higher tenured staff. Ultimately, everything it wasn't a cookie cutter, right? It was pretty a la carte, custom to the groups that they were speaking to, just to maximize the data that was going to be collected from the organizations. Once they collected that data in those interviews, they had different sessions. So, we cohorted them. That's our secret sauce, Rusty. We like to bring folks together. And so we brought folks together across different regions so that they could have shared learning opportunities as well. I know that me personally, when I'm amongst other people and other peers, I can learn just by hearing and listening to their approach as well. And so we created a space for folks to kind of hold hands as they maneuvered and navigated what it meant to be a researcher for their organization.
So that's the 16 people across these 8 orgs that are doing this participatory research. How many times did you bring them together in person after the initial training?
We brought them together in person for the initial training. It was a 2-day training initially. And then there were spaces virtually to come together to engage them throughout the whole 2-year project. Okay. And they were pretty much on the hook. I'd say that the bulk of their work occurred in a period of, I want to say, about maybe a year and a half. After about a year, the worker researchers were pretty much done. And it was kind of just taking that information and that data, synthesizing it for our final reports and seeing how we were going to tell this story and share the learnings with other funders as well.
So that's great. So they gave their reports, the worker researchers, to the management or leadership of their orgs. Then you guys met with those leaders and managers after they developed their response plans. Just to wrap up this portion of telling the story of what happened, could you give us like one example of something the leaders already knew but hadn't done anything about? And then one example of something that was like eye-opening, like, oh my God, I had no idea things were that bad on this front. Like, has anything come to mind? Or even if it's not those kind of examples, what were some of the examples of what the workers recommended for improvements?
It's so interesting because I thought everyone was going to talk about salary, right? I thought that was going to be the number one, strategy that was discussed. And surprisingly or not, it was not. And I think we talked about it afterwards. There's just a baseline understanding that a livable wage, that should be baseline. And so at no point were we starting with, we need to have a livable wage, right? It was just like baseline livable wage. What's next? Because oftentimes, I will say this, Rusty, when you talk about job quality and you're holding an organization to a standard that allows them to explore their job quality or even hold a mirror in front of their organization and take a look at their current state of job quality, folks can get out the conversation with the budget, right? Well, we only have a certain amount of money. Well, we only have this. Well, we're already under the line on this. And so once you take the money out the conversation, it's like, well, now what's your excuse, right? And so some of the strategies that I can lift up that I thought were pretty, I wouldn't say shocking, but I was like, I would have never thought of that, were things like, I would say growth and development opportunities for sure. We call that professional development. But more so what I heard from that is shared governance, spaces to co-collaborate and come to decisions together. Folks wanted to feel like they were being valued in ways where they had voice, right? And agency in their work. And so that was interesting to hear that folks just wanted spaces to collaborate, to be seen and valued and heard in ways that can grow the organization. And so that was one. And then also too, transparency. That was huge. It kept coming up, very consistency. And so one organization out of the 8 organizations chose to start there. They started because they had such a super small budget. They started with what can we do in absence of funding, right? That we can make some shifts towards a better work culture that'll lead to ultimately a better job quality. And that for them was to start with a transparency initiative. There were a lot of decisions that were being made in silo behind closed doors in absence of the employees that they would then affect, right? And so that was lifted up. And that organization chose to be more transparent and forthcoming about how they came to certain decisions when it came to the organization. So those were kind of 2 that I can kind of lift up.
Yeah, I would add a couple too. One of the really transformative changes we saw over the course of the project was a Partner Canal Alliance based in Marin County in the North Bay here. They transitioned to a 4-day work week. And there's a great piece that they wrote about that process. But we also saw organizations make really radical changes.
Yeah.
And an organization that has more resources, whose leadership maybe feels like they have firmer ground to stand on in terms of making a bold move like that. But just another example kind of on the other side of the spectrum. And then maybe more in the weeds example is conversation about when should employees be off the clock? So in direct service work, especially when you're working with people who are just scraping by, who have a lot of trauma in their lives, whose lives are unpredictable, frequently issues don't fall between 9 and 5. You're hiring people who have a deep personal connection to the work and to the people who they're serving. They might get called at 5:01. And what are they supposed to do? And so as an organizational leader, you might say, well, we have a policy that you're not supposed to answer your phone after hours. But we learned that that wasn't actually happening because of the deep concern that workers felt for the participants in their program. And so this was a sticky issue. Like, it wasn't necessarily about having a policy because the policy was there. It's about a lot of things, probably. I don't pretend to have the answer, but one thing we uncovered was if there isn't clear communication between the front line and leadership, you don't understand why a policy you put in place isn't actually resulting in the outcome that you expected it to. And so this was just an opportunity to sort of illuminate that challenge so that there could be a conversation about, well, what actually is happening here and what can we do that will really change behavior and not just make people feel guilty for helping people when they're not supposed to, which is, of course, not what any of us want to be inflicting on nonprofit workers, especially right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. The number of thoughts going through my head as you guys gave all these examples, but it's so interesting, as you were saying, Brianna, like managers might expect, oh, they're going to want more money. They're going to want raises or bonuses. But actually what they're saying is we want voice and we want to help the organization more. We want to contribute more. So maybe counterintuitive, but that's actually beneficial both to the workers who feel that would give them more empowerment and a sense of being valued and contributing what they know. And it's also beneficial to the organization.
Having a good quality job is a great staff retention policy. And it's super simple, Rusty, right? I mean, and we're talking about this. Let's just clearly define it, right? So what's a quality job? It's not super layered. It's a job that allows workers to feel like they have agency in their work. They're meeting their financial needs, right? They feel safe and respected in their work. They have opportunities to grow their skills, have a voice in decisions that are being made about them and their other coworkers, right? Decisions that affect them as staff. And, a good job allows you to exercise some control over your time and your work. It's super simple. A good job creates the space for learners to ask questions, right? Be inquisitive, grow their skills, have spaces where they have some agency, not necessarily an advisory, right? Well, we're going to have an advisory committee to advise the leadership team. No, we want to make real, true decisions. That's a good quality job. And so, and this project just pretty much lifted up that one strategy at a time.
So I want to dive into the report. In addition to the reports that each organization got from their internal researchers, you all produced with Jobs for the Future this report out to the field about what you had done and what the lessons from the overall initiative were. And there were 5 lessons learned with 5 associated principles and then 3 major recommendations as well. So Let's start with the lessons learned and the corresponding principles. So, Rob, the first one, at least first in order that is presented in the report, was that workers can surface what matters. When client-facing staff lead the research, they uncover honest feedback from their colleagues. So you want to talk more about what that process looked like and the principle that you then asserted based on that?
Yeah, so it does tie back to what I was saying earlier about the value of organizational leaders hearing directly from the people whose favor they want to curry as employees, who they want to retain. The other piece of this is really about building the muscle memory for leaders to be able to take in and interact with people who are different than them in an ongoing way and in a problem-solving way and in a way that everyone feels like they're able to participate fully. This is a skill set that is not generally taught in organizational leadership, although I don't know how many nonprofit leaders have ever gone to school for nonprofit leadership. I know I didn't. Most people didn't. It's mostly learning on the job, but you benefit from opportunities to have hard conversations. And those hard conversations don't typically happen naturally because of the power dynamic, because of your ability to control what conversations happen and don't as an organizational leader. And so there's a skill here. There's a sort of comfort level that needs to be developed. And I would say that we see when a leader is values aligned and they recognize that's the work they need to do, they'll make a decision. And most of the time they'll do the work. And sometimes they'll be like, wow. And this was actually what happened to me in my last role. It became really clear to me that I wasn't the right person to be making programmatic decisions for largely Black and brown folks who had very different challenges and life experiences than I had ever had. I didn't realize that for a long time. I recognized it. And then I started looking for other ways for me to participate in this work that we're trying to do to create space for other people who are better suited for that kind of a role in an organization serving people from that community. So I think it's an opportunity for leaders. And I think we see that leaders most often rise to the challenge, which is really heartening.
And it makes sense that in most organizations, there's not like a strong feedback loop. You're not saying, what's really crappy about the way we're treating you and your pay and our culture? Managers don't go around really often asking for serious constructive criticism of the organization. So this was a structured chance that the leadership had bought into to say, yes, we were willing to hear this. Here's a process. And it was safe. Like there was a safety in creating this anonymized. I assume all the feedback they got, all the research was aggregated from the interviews.
Yeah, we had to keep the workers safe. So it was anonymous for sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right. So Brianna, you want to talk about the second lesson learned?
Yeah, that leads us right in when we talk about the unintended benefits, right, that leadership had when they actually leaned in. And that was actually the second. When leaders listen, they grow. We found that nonprofit leaders gained completely new perspectives when they leaned into this job quality initiative. And it fostered a more supportive and a more effective workplace for leadership and for the workers as well. I think that one of the principles here is to really leverage existing aligned initiatives. We found that throughout this project, organizations who were already engaged in employee kind of well-being, or they were already thinking about the job quality of their organization, they were well positioned to quickly implement the worker researchers' recommendations and the strategies that came up. The research findings kind of reinforced and clarified this need and amplifying existing momentum to address staff burnout. I remember, was it Crop Organization? Jason, who was the identified worker researcher for that organization leading throughout the whole 2-year project, was not leadership and participated in the project, identified strategies, presented to leadership within the organization. I wouldn't say as a result, but I will say this. Jason is now the executive director of Crop Organization. That's not the only shift that I saw. There was actually someone else from another worker center who was promoted just by the nature of how this project went with the research, right? And having to engage leadership and having to kind of be seen. It was a professional development project in itself. And many of the 16 staff members that participated within this organization were either promoted or their work culture and where they sat and their positioning in their role at work shifted for the better. Also to leadership. Unbeknownst to them, right? Once they finally stopped fighting the process, right? And were willing to kind of listen, there were so many beautiful moments that we saw that leadership were able to identify new ways that they can work with staff. That was pretty transformative for their organizational and their work culture as well.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's amazing. Makes a lot of sense that those 16 people were seen in a new way. They were bringing insights to the surface that those managers needed to hear. It was helping the managers do their job in some way.
Yeah. And one thing I really appreciated, because sometimes a grant funded project can just be that. It can be a grant funded project, right? And no shifts can occur really that move the real needle. But I was really happy to see leadership not only adapting the strategies, but implementing and moving the budget around, right? Because it doesn't happen. If there's no resources allocated towards this new effort, sometimes it just dies out. And so I was really pleased to see a few organizations maybe that didn't even have HR departments listening to the strategies and the research that they learned, where staff members were wearing too many hats, and figuring out how they can streamline the work or create different departments or hire someone for HR or create an HR if they didn't have one, right? And so they were listening. Leadership was definitely listening. And that was one of the unintended outcomes, I think, for leadership, is that they found out that there were so many new ways that they can work with their staff that just led to good.
Yeah. All right, Rob, you want to talk us through the third lesson learned?
Yeah, so this is all about power dynamics. So in our work at Rework the Bay, we talk about power a lot. Our intentional approach to calling out and mitigating power dynamics, I think is a big part of what makes our work successful. And so we definitely brought that lens into this project. And we were acknowledging that there's a lot of different power dynamics. Power doesn't always just go between two entities. We were a funder working with consultants, and we wanted to be involved, but we also wanted them to be able to bring their full expertise and energy to the project. Consultants working with the organizations, there was some power dynamic there too. They maybe were seen as extended arms of a funder. They may also be still worried about is this going to be a gotcha moment? Can we trust these researchers? And then, of course, the power dynamic we focused most on was the dynamic between the frontline workers and the organizational leadership. And ultimately, what we always come back to, and Brianna mentioned this earlier, is that power dynamics don't change unless power is in some way shared. And sharing power doesn't mean abdicating power. It doesn't mean giving it all away. It does mean, though, creating some space for other people who can add to a decision to be able to participate. And in order for them to be taken seriously, they need to have a little power. And that power can come from an outside entity like Rework the Bay, building a structure like this that sort of shines a light on an organization and helps them make the decision to share power in this way. But it can also just come from internally as well, where there are opportunities that leaders need to make decisions that will predominantly impact the folks who aren't at the table making the decision. That's a moment where a leader can say, I have all the power in this situation, and I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And is there a value in me actually not just asking a few people or putting out a survey, but actually sitting down and saying, this is a really important decision we need to make. You all are the ones who are going to benefit or not from it. So let's work together to develop a decision-making structure and a process that stays neat as it can be, that everyone's able to bring their perspective to the table, leadership in addition to workers, and then come to a decision. And so that happened to varying degrees through this project. And I think different organizations had different levels of familiarity with the concept of sharing power, different orientation towards it. Some of the more organizing-oriented organizations, I think that came more naturally. In workforce development, it's not a very common thing still. And so some of the more pure workforce development organizations needed more support potentially. And then I would also say that I think we saw a difference in organizational orientation to this work based on how the organization came to be and who led the organization. Brianna mentioned CROP earlier, Creating Restorative Opportunities and Programs, which is a residential reentry program based in Oakland. They do work in LA as well. They were an organization that was founded in San Quentin. It was founded by incarcerated people. Ultimately, it was expanded to become a community-based program, continues to be operated by formerly incarcerated people. Mm-hmm. From the beginning of that organization, they had job quality as a key attribute because they personally had experienced bad jobs and they didn't want to replicate that. And so who the leader is isn't everything. And who the leader is can make a huge difference, has been my experience. I think we saw that through this project.
It's very true. That leads us right into the next lesson learned here, which is just that this is not a one size fits all.
Right.
Job quality requires differentiated strategies, right? And it's needed because organizations have different sizes, different maturities, different budgets. And one principle that was really lifted up within this project is to build a culture of collaboration. The journey of exploring and improving job quality, it can really be just as transformative as the outcome themselves. And that's a pivotal point of difference, right? We observed that organizations that intentionally kind of cultivate collaboration, trust, transparency, and empathy across all staff levels create a stronger foundation for employee wellness and satisfaction. And it can look like different things. It can look like, I mentioned transparency earlier. Some strategies to the challenge of transparency at your organization or lack of transparency would be to like create a town hall, right? Or at our organization at the San Francisco Foundation, we have during our staff meetings, staff can ask me anything, right? So you can literally ask anything. We used to call it rumors and myths. Anything you might be thinking of, a question, a concern, you can put it on a card and they'll address it at the staff meeting. Just other spaces for staff to kind of submit anonymous questions or concerns that organizational leadership can be held accountable for answering. When you think about a strategy for burnout or mental health, everyone can explore a 4-day work week like Canal Alliance did, right? But maybe there is a wellness reimbursement. Maybe there's some type of budget that staff can kind of tap into, whether it be monthly or quarterly, to reimburse them for any wellness activities that they've done. Maybe it's not funding. Maybe it's as simple as improving your job descriptions and having some type of like improved role clarity. Sometimes that's enough, and that can help your mental health as well.
Yeah. It really depends on the context of how the lack of quality is manifesting, or what are the pain points that particular people and roles are experiencing in particular orgs, and then responding to that in kind. It makes a lot of sense. So the fifth one, you want to talk about that real quick, Rob?
Yeah, I can just really quickly say that it's about that this work just takes time. And I would add to that job quality is a process, not a destination. We will never reach perfect job quality at any organization. And so it, of course, takes time because it happens incrementally. And I think it kind of has to happen that way. But we just encourage people to not be discouraged if it doesn't feel like things just like a light switch all of a sudden are great. The world that we live in right now is not offering that opportunity right now.
This is great. So thank you for running through the 5 findings. And there's a lot more, folks, in the report. So in the show notes, you'll have a link to the report, and you can read more about those 5 lessons learned and the principles associated with them. There's 3 kind of recommendations in the end, and I'm just going to read them off, and then you can each maybe comment on them real quick. So 3 recommendations to the field were advancing shared leadership, transforming funding systems, and elevating collective voice. Anything you all want to comment on about what those mean to you, or anything you want to add to those crystal clear statements?
Yeah, shared leadership, huge. I think organizational leaders can continue to really invest in resources and mechanisms for shared leadership between staff and their leadership teams. Really being intentional about embedding worker voice into the decision-making process at the leadership or even at the board level, worker-led internal committees, things like that, right? I mentioned the anonymous feedback, opportunities to share suggestions without fear of retaliation, and just really kind of institutionalizing, I feel like, transparent decision-making, right? That holds specific members of leadership team kind of accountable for considering staff voice at different levels within the organization, and exploring participatory budgeting. That's a big one as well, where employees actually get to play a role in deciding how certain funds are allocated. I want to say this about shared leadership. It's not a one-time fix, right? It's not a one-time fix, you're done. It's really an ongoing journey when you think about job quality and you think about shared leadership and kind of progressing at its own pace. Again, context matters, right? Differential strategies matter. And so I feel like the examples I gave right now for shared leadership are great, but they require different levels of investment. I will say that. And they can be adopted based on where an organization is starting from. But the idea is that it's ongoing regarding shared leadership.
Yes. Now, for the folks listening who want to reimagine things, Rob, where can people find Rework the Bay on the internet?
Yeah, we're a small but mighty 2-person team, so our communications presence isn't as robust as we would like. But I will say we put out an amazing newsletter. Brianna takes the lead on that every month. You can go to our website, reworkthebay.org. On the upper right-hand corner, there's an email sign up. I definitely encourage you to do that. And then connect with us on LinkedIn. That's our main social media presence right now. We also just encourage folks to reach out to us as well. We are always learning and always interested in particularly what's happening in other parts of the country that feels relevant to the work that we're doing here in the Bay. So yeah, just really welcome even just conversations to learn about other folks' work that we can learn from and maybe incorporate into the work we're doing here.
Fantastic. Well, we will put the link to the newsletter sign up, the link to your LinkedIn and the website, and we'll put your guys, if you don't mind, put your LinkedIn profiles as well so people can connect with you on LinkedIn and be in touch. And I want to give a shout out as we close to the San Francisco Foundation for being open to these changes and the evolution of Rework the Bay. I think that's fantastic that a community foundation has hosted this for so long and enabled it to evolve. And also the James Irvine Foundation, which Fund the People is now supported by as well. So happy to be co-grantees of the Irvine Foundation with Rework the Bay. So yeah, we're excited to continue our work in California in 2026 through our relatively new grant from Irvine, and hope to get the chance to partner with you all and be with you together in person soon. So thank you again, a 2-person team. Both of you made time to be here and prepare, and I'm extraordinarily grateful. So thank you for your time and all the work you do.
Thank you so much, Rusty. Can I share one last thing, Rusty? A call to action to my fellow foundations out there and to my fellow funders out there. I understand that right now we have a very tricky political climate that we're working within. And I just want to offer that for anyone who is looking to make bold investments, right, but they can't necessarily do so within the constrictions of the parameters that they have to operate within, Rework the Bay is a wonderful initiative, right? Because we are truly, truly showing how traditional pass-through funding can be magnified through the lens of proximate philanthropy. And so if you're looking to find an entity and a vehicle where you can make bold investments and still stay safe on your end, contact Rework the Bay. We'll get the job done.
I love it. Thank you for the pitch out to the audience. I hope someone catches it or bats it right out of the park. I don't know if I'm getting my sports analogies right, but I'm trying. All right. Thank you both so much.
Thanks, Rusty.
Thanks, Rusty.